You are listening to the Star Lores Podcast.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
Once professed by Master Yoda as one of the most learned Jedi in the ways of the Force, Count Dooku became the fearsome Dark Lord of the Sith, infamously known as Darth Tyranus. His rise through the Jedi ranks and the subsequent betrayal by leading the separatist armies against the Republic is second to none, with the exception of Anakin Skywalker, his ironic successor. Although known as a malevolent servant of the Sith for more than 70 years, he served the Jedi Order and trained many Padawans, like Kamari Vosa and even Qui-Gon Jinn at the Jedi Temple. It was only during the disastrous battle against the true Mandalorians on Galadran, where Dooku had his crisis of faith and fell to the dark side. Even so, it could be argued that the Count's allegiance to the Sith was political as opposed to religious. Dooku was swayed by Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, and finding their print from the same cloth of the Sith, Count Dooku became Palpatine's, that is Darth Sidious's, apprentice. From that moment on, Dooku began a movement across the galaxy, spreading division and strife to split the galaxy in half and start the Clone Wars.
Beginnings.
Dooku heralded from Sorenno, a planet in the Outer Rim ruled by an aristocratic elite of counts. The planet was ill-famed for resisting other worldly authorities, both Sith and Republic, and became a hotbed for young and angry dissenters like Dooku. He was brought up in royalty as a classic count from Sorenno, but instead of living in great houses, was brought in the way of the Jedi from an early age. His parents were aware and very proud of his Force abilities, and released him into the tutelage of the Jedi rather willingly, as they had other children to carry on the Dooku lineage. As a youngling, he was the swiftest learner of his year, and unlike the other pupils, knew the nobility where he came from and the strife his home planet caused. Before ascending to Padawan, Dooku immersed himself in the study of diplomacy and even enrolled in special tutorials for Senate protocols. When Dooku was 13 years of age, he had an even further opportunity to interact with the social power when Jedi Master Thame Cerulean enlisted him as his apprentice. Cerulean occupied a seat on the Jedi High Council and was known as a galactic historian at the time, a teacher Dooku studied well from. In addition to learning from a well-renowned Jedi, the great Master Yoda took deep interest in the youth. He found great counsel and great critic in Yoda, who was quick to point out the troubles the boy was facing. A Padawan friend by the name of Nod grew envious of Dooku's success and blamed the theft of a dark holocron on Dooku. Although he was absolved and Nod expelled out of the Jedi Order, Dooku would never forget the betrayal and would never grow wary of those who wanted to call him friend. Yoda trained Dooku in the lightsaber arts, and with the knowledge of Great Master, Dooku became an expert duelist. With few to match his skills, Master Cerulean was astounded at his Padawan's progression in the ways of the Force, professing him as his most gifted student he ever taught. Rising in the ranks, Dooku began to speaking out not just in Jedi affairs, but against corruption that had been eating through the Galactic Republic. The Jedi.
While Dooku was finishing up his Padawan training, he met another Force trainee, Qui-Gon Jinn, a boy 10 years younger, who impressed him with his capabilities. Dooku convinced Master Yoda that he could take on Qui-Gon as an apprentice. In his 20s, Dooku became a Jedi Knight and enlisted Qui-Gon as his first Padawan. During his tutelage of the young Qui-Gon, the pair would run into several misadventures along the way, featuring a run-in with space pirates and his old nemesis, Nod. While escorting a senator, they found themselves ambushed by the pirates who kidnapped politicians for ransom. It was only Qui-Gon's level head that saved the pirate from Dooku's vengeance. The pair would go off for more dangerous missions before Qui-Gon himself would become a Jedi Knight and Dooku a Jedi Master. Their parting advice to his dear student was be wary of friends and even more wary of the inevitability of betrayal. As Dooku and Qui-Gon moved up in the order, their relationship grew more distant, despite Qui-Gon actually becoming more of a disciple in the teachings of Dooku as opposed to Yoda, although he would reject the last tenet, that being of the inevitability of betrayal. Now as a Jedi Master, Dooku became an instructor and pursued the perfection of lightsaber swordsmanship. His techniques became part of the curriculum for Padawans, and his methods for overcoming arrogance were well regarded. He was offered a seat on the Jedi High Council, but surprisingly rejected the motion to pursue more political aspirations, contending he was better suited as a peacekeeper. Eventually, he accepted a chair in the Jedi High Council, but continued to pursue diplomatic matters in the Galactic Republic, and became renowned at settling conflicts. He was heralded as a proponent of peace by a certain Supreme Chancellor Palpatine in much later years. Over the course of his career, he befriended several rising Jedi Masters, like that of Mace Windu and Sifo Dyas, and the young Kamari Vosa. He was considered by many to be part of the Old Guard in the waning years of the Galactic Republic, and Jedi Master Dooku had seemingly found his destiny among the great heroes of the Jedi Temple. That is, if not were for Galadran.
The Count. In 44 BBY, the true Mandalorians invaded Galadran, and the governor of Galadran begged the Jedi Council to help him defeat the foes. A hastily put together contingent of Jedi Knights were given to Dooku and sent to deal with the threat. The Jedi were ill-prepared and ill-informed to respond to the Mandalorians, except for Dooku, who was versed in some of their ways. They were skillful and feared warriors, well matched against the unwary Jedi. What Dooku was very ill-informed for was that the ruling body of Galadran brought the Mandalorians in to put down an insurgency, but double-crossed them and were using the Jedi to defeat the Mandalorians. Dooku and the Jedi fought the Mandalorians with great casualties on both sides, but when the dust settled, the Force wielders proved victorious, having decimated their foes. However, the Mandalorians did not go down without a fight, and Dooku admittingly respected the ferocity of the warriors, in particular their leader, Jango Fett, who killed several Jedi in hand-to-hand combat. Dooku soon learned how the Galadrian government used the Jedi to kill the Mandalorians. The ruler of Galadrian confirmed his deep-seated beliefs of betrayal, and it infuriated him. Something changed in Dooku, and given his extent of influence across the galaxy, so he would change the entire Galactic Republic. Returning back to the Jedi Order, Dooku started refusing missions from the Council and withdrew from its affairs. He did choose to remain within the Jedi for another 12 years, with a different purpose in mind. And in his words,
I still believed that I could accomplish some good as a Jedi. I thought I could bring about some positive changes, right certain wrongs, and do better than maintain the status quo.
His new mission, however, was muddled with troubling prophecies of the galaxy entering a new era, one of shadow and darkness. It was Senator Palpatine who sensed him out, rooting Dooku's disillusionment of the Galactic Republic and befriending the Jedi Master. They held several private meetings, and despite Dooku's devotions to the ways of the Jedi, he understood the benefits of communing with the dark side of the Force. He further believed the dark side could be wielded without moral betrayal if the ends justify the means. Senator Palpatine counted Dooku as an ally, and to secretly take advantage of Dooku's disenchantment with the Jedi Order and current establishment. The Senator set plans in motion to bring about the end of the Republic, starting with the Battle of Naboo in 32 BBY and the killing of Dooku's apprentice, Qui-Gon Jinn, at the hands of Darth Maul. Qui-Gon's death was shocking, but Dooku turned his anger and condemnation towards the Galactic Senate for their weak and apathetic reaction to the Naboo crisis. He quit his position at the Jedi Council without explanation or announcement and withdrew from the public sphere, opting to return to his homeworld, Sorenno. The resignation sent shockwaves through the Jedi Order and was a sure omen of the dark times to come. Back on Sorenno, Dooku resumed family affairs by sending the nobility to claim his title as Count, and so, from Jedi Master, Count Dooku came to power.
Darth Tyranus.
You have no business left with the Pikes Tyrannus.
Tyrannus? You are the man called Tyrannus?
I told you everything you needed to know on Geonosis all those years ago, Kenobi. You should have joined me. Sifo-Dyas understood. He saw the future. That is why he helped me.
You lie. Minister Long, if you're going to help us, now is the time.
The destiny of Dooku could have ended in honor as a count on Sorenno, a return to ruling the people that understood him most. But Count Dooku quickly grew unsettled and thought of chasing down the second Sith Lord, who was involved in the killing of Qui-Gon Jinn. He also was growing resentful of the Jedi Council, believing they had an equal indirect hand in the death of his former Padawan. Chancellor Palpatine visited Count Dooku and found he had also been musing about a new galactic order to replace the aged and corrupted Republic. Their ideals aligned, Palpatine began to plot a movement with Count Dooku for a galactic coup. He did not reveal his true identity as the other Sith Lord yet, considering Dooku's emotional state with the death of Qui-Gon. But plans started moving ahead, sowing discord among the Separatists and taking control of a clone army. Using his unlimited resources as Count on Sorenno, Dooku saw Chancellor Palpatine's plans come to fulfillment, starting with assuming control over the clone projects from his friend he killed, Sifo Dyas. Now deeply embedded with the Sith, Palpatine revealed himself as Darth Sidious, the other Sith Lord responsible for Qui-Gon's death. Despite Count Dooku's grief over his former Padawan, he found it more appealing to continue his alliance with Darth Sidious if it meant the end of the corruptible Galactic Republic. Under the name of his dead friend, Sifo Dyas, Count Dooku carried out the clone project, and in an ironic twist, employed the Mandalorian he spared on Galadran as the genetic blueprint for the clone army. It seemed fitting to use such a deadly warrior and Jedi killer like that of Jango Fett. It was during his time that Count Dooku began secretive training in the ways of the Sith from Darth Sidious, and was renamed Darth Tyranus. He learned in the dark places of Coruscant, far from the lights of the Capitol buildings or the Jedi Temple, where he himself once taught, once had discourse, and once dreamed of changing the Galactic Republic from within. Now, Count Dooku was silently going behind the scenes, starting to sow the seeds of distrust and unrest among the galactic players. He was intervening in peace talks, supporting planetary coups, and even though the Jedi Order managed to quash many of his schemes, they were always one step behind the grand vision of the Sith. Once aligning himself with the Trade Federation and their vast droid army, war was only a few light years away. 10 years into their web of schemes, Darth Sidious and Darth Tyranus were starting to see their plans come to fruition. Count Dooku returned to the public eye with a scathing speech against the Galactic Republic and Jedi Order for its corruption and mediocrity, denouncing their ability to rule competently, and called for a movement to join the Separatists. Dissension spread like wildfire, and it was clear Count Dooku had voiced what many in the galaxy had felt all along. He himself did not commandeer a single planet or resistance front. Rather, he moved throughout the galaxy, spreading his message with rumors and propaganda. Becoming increasingly controversial, an illegal bounty was put on his head, and several best-selling authors wrote stories about his rise to fame. Chancellor Palpatine acted on his behalf and pretended to offer peace and sit down with Dooku in council, though this was all going to plan, as the Sith foretold. War would be coming to the galaxy. It was here Dooku sought Grievous to lead the droid armies, though conspired to have the general mortally wounded and then reconstructed as a cyborg to be more under their influence. The whole matter was rather loathsome to Count Dooku, but he was pleased with the flesh made into machine, and personally trained Grievous in his unmatched tutelage of the lightsaber duel. With armies to engage and generals to lead, the galaxy was ripe for war.
The Clone Wars.
The opening acts of the Clone Wars in Count Dooku, leading carnage throughout the galaxy, was not a grand crusade, or the fires of pocketed resistance igniting the planet ablaze. Rather, a conspiracy unmasked by the Senator Amidala and the Jedi Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. A foiled assassination against the Senator led the Jedi on a trail that revealed the clone facilities that were raising the so-called clone army of the Republic, and then Count Dooku, Trade Federation and their allies scheming on the dust world of Geonosis. Dooku caught Obi-Wan Kenobi and tried to insist on a misunderstanding. Through probing the Jedi's mind for some sympathy in that the Republic was corrupt, and even Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan's own master, would have joined Count Dooku's plight. Obi-Wan refused the feeling. At an impasse, Count Dooku handed him over to the Separatists. Condemned to die, Anakin, Amidala, and Kenobi were sentenced to be devoured by wild creatures as sport for the Geonosians and the Separatists who bore a grudge, particularly at Senator Amidala. However, as Count Dooku and his allies watched a host of Jedi, led by Mace Windu, intervened and saved the captives. Despite the surprise invasion, Dooku foresaw such a rescue and had thousands of battle droids and destroyer droids grind the Jedi down until only a handful remained. What the Count did not foresee was an army of clones, led by Yoda, suddenly dropped from the sky and not only rescued the rescuers, but overwhelmed the droid armies. The Battle of Geonosis all but wiped out the Separatist forces, causing them to abandon the planet and fall back to Allied stars. Among the hasty retreat, Dooku was entrusted with the plans of what was revered as the ultimate weapon for safekeeping back into the hands of Darth Sidious. The Count would not end his journey without lightsaber combat with both Obi-Wan and Anakin Skywalker. The former Jedi Master, now turned Dark Lord, easily overwhelmed the two, conjuring up dark side powers, force lightning, telekinetics, and his superior wielding of the lightsaber. He incapacitated Obi-Wan and lopped off Anakin's hand. He could not revel in his victory, however, as indeed Geonosis had fallen, and a Master Yoda now barred his path of escape. The two dueled with such ferocity, and matching Dooku's conjuration of the dark side with his own power of the Force. Dooku soon realized he could not overwhelm his old master, and turned to try and bury Obi-Wan and Anakin under a great column, forcing Yoda to intervene and allowing the Count to take flight. The battle lost, but the war beginning, Dooku arrived in Coruscant, and under the shelter of an industrial wasteland, presented Darth Sidious with the plans for the ultimate weapon, or Death Star, as it would later be known.
War Years.
Master Yoda.
Count Dooku.
You have interfered with our affairs for the last time.
Powerful you have become, Dooku. The dark side I sense in you.
I've become more powerful than any Jedi. Even you.
After the loss of Geonosis, Count Dooku regrouped the Separatist forces and began to roll out the long drawn-out Clone Wars. In the early stages, his charisma and confidence inspired many systems into the ranks of the Separatists, and even the Jedi Council at first was not in complete agreement to denounce the movement. Corruption and civil unrest was apparent, and several Jedi understood the Separatists as a plight against a broken system. Several professed neutrality, while others aligned themselves with the Separatist cause. However, his true devotion to the dark side started becoming apparent, and he grew in infamy and terror as a figurehead of the Separatists and as Darth Tyranus, the Sith Lord. As a Count Dooku would head several war campaigns across the galaxy, but as Darth Tyranus, he led excavations to resurrect old Sith weapons like the Dark Reaper, or invest in diabolical weaponry like the Decimators. However, he would also cross paths many times with his adversaries, Anakin and Obi-Wan, and would often disrupt his plans. But even so, Count Dooku and Darth Sidious only knew these as minor setbacks to the greater revolution. As a matter of fact, the Count and Sidious deliberately sabotaged potential victories to draw out the war in order to achieve the wills of the Sith. An illustrated account of this was when the cloning facilities were discovered on Kamino. However, when the Separatists arrived, they were overwhelmed by the Republic fleet. Despite Count Dooku's full awareness, the clones were warned of the potential ambush. In the mind's eye of the Sith, both clone and droid armies still needed to wage a war, and the destruction of Kamino could have been the undoing of a balance of power they still needed. Unbeknownst to Count Dooku, Lord Sidious thought of him in the exact same way.
The finale. Many acts of villainy, victories, and losses accompanied the Count as the Clone Wars progressed, and much was written about him, almost as the anti-hero of a corrupt republic that was dying. But just as Count Dooku used the Separatists for the means to an end, so too was he the means to an end, and the beginning of an even greater Sith Lord. A final stage was in place that would begin with the Separatists staging a surprise attack against Coruscant and capture the Chancellor. As Obi-Wan and Anakin would try to rescue the politician, Dooku would intervene and kill Kenobi, inciting Anakin into such a fury that the Count and Darth Sidious could channel down a path to the dark side. From that point, Dooku was supposed to be captured, then switch sides and place blame of all the war crimes and atrocities on General Grievous. He would proclaim innocence, a meager voice against corruption, and when the war was over and the Sith were ruling, he would take his new position in a new galactic empire. Anakin and Obi-Wan did try to rescue the Chancellor, as was foretold, but Count Dooku soon realized that years of fighting the Clone Wars had granted the Jedi with experience, and their first duel had given them caution. Dooku increased his ferocity, and again surprised the Jedi with conjuring dark side powers to aid in his fight, like force pushing, force choking, and finally, force telekinesis. Even so, Anakin alone was able to match and even surpass Count Dooku's skills with a lightsaber. For taking off his one hand, Anakin cut both of Dooku's off in an epic blow, and had him at his mercy of his lightsaber. The moment completely shocked the Count. Throughout the Clone Wars, even the most devastating defeats were always part of the plans for final victory for the Sith. And in his defeat at the hands of Skywalker, perhaps he realized this too was part of the plan for final victory. It was so when Chancellor Palpatine, that is Darth Sidious, told Anakin to kill Count Dooku. Throughout the Count Dooku's life, from a young Padawan to one of the greatest Jedis to walk within the temple walls, to his allegiance with the Sith, the shadow of betrayal has always walked beside him. Be it his friends, the Republic he tried to change, the religion of the Jedi he followed, or even the dark side of the Force he swore allegiance to. In the end, Dooku became the villainy that pursued him. When he used and betrayed the Separatists and countless other lives in the Clone Wars for the purposes of the Sith, until that very master brought him to the lightsabers of his arch enemy, Anakin. Betrayal was the tenet he lived by. Betrayal was the tenet he would die by. Thanks for flying with us. Jordan here. Just wanted to let everyone know what's happening here at the Star Lords podcast. Star Lords is now on Discord. If you would like to join the Star Lords Cantina Discord server, you can find a link in the description or on any of our social media accounts. Reach out with a DM or email. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter by searching the Star Lords podcast. Go ahead and give our page a like and send us a message. You can also email at starlordspodcast@gmail.com. Send us your fan art, Star Wars collections, or fan fictions, and you may even get a feature on one of our pages or even the show. Don't be afraid to offer corrections or add to any of the topics that we discuss on the show. We are also on Patreon. So if you want to help us pay the bills, as well as get a few awesome perks like bonus episodes, access to the private Facebook group, or the VIP section of the Discord server, head on over to patreon.com/starlores and sign up for as little as $1 a month. And finally, make sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcatcher app or YouTube, as well as sending us a 5-star review on iTunes. This really helps us reach a wider audience. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Everybody, welcome back.
This is Jordan.
This is Christian. And today we're not actually on the Millennial Falcon. We've decided to set her down on the beautiful world of Sorenno to see their hallowed halls and opulent palaces.
Mm-hmm.
Today we're talking about one of Sorenno's most infamous or famous
or infamous,
yeah,
however you like to look at it.
Which is a great way to start this off with Count Dooku. Was he really a bad guy?
This is a topic we broach a lot. Is it really?
Are things really the way they appear? Yeah. So there's a lot of interest. He's an interesting character through and through. I think he has a lot of complexity, a lot of depth that, you know, for someone you don't actually see all that much in the movies, like in terms of like scene for scene, he has a very small screen presence. He appears a lot more in comic books and like alt media and in like the Clone Wars TV series, which we'll discuss in a bit. But for someone with that little screen presence, he has a lot of depth and a lot of complexity. So yeah, was he all that bad? He was obviously in league with the Sith, and he was also fighting against the corruption of the Republic, this like rotten core. And he obviously was also a very wise Jedi, and like his teachings resonated with people like Qui-Gon in particular, that kind of like, I don't know how to phrase it. They were more practical teachings, less idealistic teachings, which arguably was kind of the flaw of the Jedi High Council at the time of the waning of the Republic, right? Like they became too pent up in their ideals, and they weren't able to see kind of like, they aligned themselves with a lot of the rot that Dooku was fighting against. So that's the first thing. Was he all that bad?
Yeah, I know there's sort of the question, and we kind of discussed it in the scripted portion, just about how he sort of justified his future actions by like the ends justifies the means, and sort of started making small compromises, you know. But it is like there is always the question, like, can you ever really get progress if you let the perfect be the enemy of the good, you know? Like if you have to have complete, pure, upstanding moral character, without making any compromises can you actually get anything done. I think that's like contextual and situational. It's like it's kind of a difficult calculation to make. I think there are like situations, even in life, like there's situations
in real life, yeah.
and people that like you can look up to and admire because of how dedicated they are to whatever cause they might have, but
they also have flaws.
Yeah, there's only so far it can sort of go, you know. So, or it can only move the needle culturally so far. I don't know. I think there's like all sorts of like subcultures and stuff who are very much like where you have like a purist mentality, you know, and sort of in a lot of ways the purist mentality is correct. It's like it seems philosophically correct. It seems like morally correct, but it doesn't have any larger sway because like the vast majority of people.
Yeah. If anything, they're losing membership over time rather than gaining. Yeah. I'm sure Star Wars fans know nothing about purism and
yes, exactly. Like we are like legends purists.
Oh no, I'm having a crisis of faith now.
But that's not true. We like The Mandalorian.
Yeah, there are rare exceptions. Yeah. We like quality content.
Yeah. We won't say never ever, but
something else you said there though too about the compromises, right? Like at what point do you cross a line where like, you know what, you've compromised so much that you've kind of lost the point. You're no longer the good guy, right? You actually genuinely become the villain.
Yeah.
And that's also an interesting take. Like, did Count Dooku start out with good intentions? And that was the flaw that the dark side used to exploit, the same way Anakin, the same way, you know, people don't just 180 drop all their values and decide to be bad guys, right?
Yeah.
Usually there's a character weakness or a flaw or something that gets exploited that, you know, compromise after compromise, little things, and eventually next thing you know, you're leading a genocide on a planet.
It kind of becomes like a cancer, you know, like as it grows and festers, but at the same time, there are also, like Dooku himself was fighting a cancer within the Republic,
right?
Like a legitimate one.
And like how do you fight cancer with radiation?
Yeah,
but that also kills you. So
that's
like,
right. Yeah.
How much harm do you do till you actually succumb? Right.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's like a difficult tightrope to walk, I think, for most people. But I don't know. I think if we didn't have like films that were just so black and white, and you'd have maybe a little more room to explore. But I think you could. I'm sure in much of like the literature and stuff, it adds shades of gray.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if anything, it actually makes them worse. Which I'll get to in a sec. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
I just also wanted to kind of mention like that theme of betrayal and like that being one of the tenets of Dooku's life. You kind of think, oh, it's kind of foreshadowing Dooku's betrayal of the Jedi and like his old way of life, but really like it does follow him all the way to his own betrayal. Like Dooku was used as a pawn just as much as, you know, the clones were. So in a lot of ways, he's also a victim of the scheming of the Sith, right? He was always going to be disposable. He was never going to achieve what he wanted. And that was by design. It wasn't an accident. Sidious plotted it that way.
And it could be even like maybe Dooku's like actually did have pure motivations all along. And Sidious saw that and was like, I can't have like an ideologue. I need a
tool.
Yeah, a tool, exactly.
Where Anakin's the perfect tool.
Precisely.
In more ways than one.
Yeah.
And that leads to the broader question of, can the dark side of the Force be used for good? And that's come up a couple of times too. You have people like Darth Krayt and others. There's even the whole theory, which isn't canon at all whatsoever. But the theory that Sidious was actually the reason he wanted to establish the Galactic Empire was to have a united front against the Vong invasion that he first saw coming.
Yeah.
That's not canon, for the record.
Yeah.
I kind of like it. We'll get into it in another
I kind of
episode.
like it too.
But we know for a fact that's not why he did it. He can still be a bad guy and he should be a bad guy.
Yeah.
But that being said, like, we've seen this kind of theme come up with like kind of using it as a means to an ends. And again, that question of like, well, how corrupting is this thing that you try to use? And it's a classic feature for someone using kind of like a powerful thing. And Lord of the Rings has that too, right?
Yeah.
In which case, like, people try to use the ring for good, but
That's right.
at the end of the day, no one can. It's not possible, and that's kind of a reality that people need to.
And I think like a lot of people will compromise their values given the right situation or the right context. Like, a lot of people don't think they will, but even, I mean, not to get too controversial here, but even like look at COVID over the last 2 years and like some of the things that governments and stuff engaged in. And what even like the average person engaged in or advocated for would have been something that if you asked them 3 years ago or 4 years ago, if they would do that,
Would have been very different.
Yeah, they probably would have given you a different answer. But when a situation or a circumstance comes up, it will change your calculation a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about then Dooku's portrayal in other media. So Dooku gets very much bent towards the dark side through outside of the movies. So in the comic books, and particularly in the Clone Wars series, he definitely comes off as a true villain.
Yeah.
He does some pretty heinous things, and there's never that kind of like, well, is he doing it for better cause or for pure motives? It's definitely portrayed as, and of course we don't necessarily see him all the time and like through his eyes. So you could still, in the background, if say you wrote a book about his portrayal in the movie or in the TV series, you could get away with something more like, okay, he had ulterior motives or he was actually trying to achieve this objective or whatever. But definitely in other media, he is portrayed more as a dark figure. And in that, it could also be said that he started out in episode 2, let's say, with those pure intentions, and over time, the corruption, the scheming, the plotting just led him down a darker and darker path, where ultimately he did become a genuine bad guy, even if he didn't start out that way necessarily.
Yeah.
Talking a little bit about Dooku's earlier years, I think this is a really compelling relationship, is Dooku and Qui-Gon.
Yeah.
I think they're both super underutilized characters that have like a lot of complex development, again, which you don't totally get from the screen portrayal. Yeah. All the talk of like Qui-Gon being a borderline gray Jedi, going against the will of the Council, and then like people like Dooku who were literally his instructor. And then that I remember even when the first time I watched episode 2, just being so compelled by Dooku kind of seducing Obi-Wan to the dark side, saying like, Qui-Gon would have like saw the same things. Qui-Gon would have joined me.
Yeah.
And I always thought, like, part of me is like, is that Dooku lying, obviously, to get Obi-Wan to join him, or is it actually true?
Right.
And would Qui-Gon really have done this? And it's actually a genuine question, right? Like, we don't know
true.
because Qui-Gon's dead,
Yeah.
but it's definitely an interesting thought.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think exploring like the relationship between Qui-Gon and Dooku would be super interesting, especially because it's not really portrayed that much in the movies. But it is, you kind of forget that they were like very closely linked, and like Sifo Dyas too, like the role that he played in Dooku's life. In a lot of ways, the character of Sifo Dyas was actually written to add to, it's like one of those characters that's actually built for another character, and Sifo kind of was made for Dooku.
He's a plot device.
Yeah, exactly. in a lot of ways, right? He did play a role in the bigger plot, but it is interesting how like these kind of important characters were all either influenced or were influenced by Dooku.
Yeah. One interesting thought too is, so you do see him briefly as a young Jedi at the Battle of Galadran through the Jango Fett open seasons comic book series. Fantastic series, highly recommend. Love the Mandalorian portrayal in that.
Mm-hmm.
But also that's where you kind of see Dooku realize like, and almost kind of not take the route of like the ends justify the means. He sees how rotten the Republic is, and he's like, we just massacred, and they massacred like this Mandalorian faction to a man, except for Jango Fett.
Yeah.
And then he's like, the Jedi, this is not what Jedi do. This is not who we are.
Yeah.
And that's totally true, and that's a legitimate concern. And again, it's like you get a brief glimpse of Dooku as a younger person. And that could lead to some cool, like, series making, I think, if you followed the story of Dooku as a character, or the main character of a series or something like that. There is an upcoming animated TV series that Disney is putting out that it looks like, I believe we're going to see a young Dooku in it.
Oh, okay.
So that is an interesting thing. We'll see if Disney takes all this depth and complexity built up from the past, or if they kind of just rewrite him as a new character. We'll see.
Yeah.
But there is maybe hope for that, and maybe fleshing out.
How much younger, do you know?
He looks like he's definitely he's a Jedi. Like, he doesn't have a beard or anything.
Like a young adult, maybe.
Yeah, or maybe even maybe as a Jedi Master, maybe hopefully tutoring Qui-Gon.
Oh, okay.
No spoilers.
A young Qui-Gon.
Qui-Gon seems to have featured recently in a certain Star Wars media, so it's possible that they're trying to build up for that later payoff, if they have that kind of planning acumen, which they haven't thus far. But we'll see. We'll see if they actually follow through with it.
We'll see. Yeah.
But it's just an interesting thing that maybe we'll see in the next couple of years here.
Yeah.
Dooku does have a lot of history too that we kind of glossed over during the Clone Wars era. Again, there is so much material put out for the Clone Wars where Dooku features and all these other characters feature. So maybe we'll come back and revisit some more kind of specific battles or actions that maybe he took in the future.
Yeah. One interesting thing that we didn't really discuss in the script was one of the fighting techniques that Dooku uses.
Yeah.
And this is more, I think, in the literature this is written, but it's called the Dun Mock. And it's sort of like a technique of psychological warfare that a lot of the Sith use, where they'll taunt or spread doubt, or it's like a tactical move. It's not even really because they genuinely mean it. It's just like a way to
get inside your head.
Yeah, exactly. Getting inside people's head.
You do see Dooku doing this to Anakin and Obi-Wan. He's talking to them while he's dueling.
Yeah. And I believe they even sort of, how Obi-Wan can what's that force trick he uses where he can make someone
mind trick?
Yeah, like the mind trick. I think with the Don Mock, it's sort of they're using the dark side to sort of influence their opponents as well.
Yeah, it's a more aggressive.
Yeah,
while you're literally fighting someone at the same time. Yeah.
So kind of an interesting thing that he was a master of.
Yeah. On top of his he was an excellent duelist as well. So it's cool that he's attacking you physically and mentally at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And he was yes, he loses to Anakin, but Anakin is a really hard standard to uphold to. But he is better than probably most.
I think he's a little underrated, and he trained Grievous, right?
Yeah.
How to use.
Who was a Jedi, a prominent Jedi killer.
Yeah, so. Exactly. So yeah, I think he's definitely underrated as a fighter, and he was probably better even when he was a little bit younger than he was in the movies. But yeah, he's definitely a very formidable opponent. But I think maybe the unglorious way in which he died was in just psychologically to me sort of made me view him as
lesser.
Sort of insignificant. But it's
Star
really
Wars has
not
such
true.
a bad habit of
doing
that to their characters.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Just kind of writing them off and throwing them away. Really cool. Okay, now we're going to toss this guy.
Yeah.
On that note, so funnily enough, there is kind of some script doctors who have gone over episode 1 and episode 2 to try and make them more cohesive stories and better overarching plot. And a lot of people merge the characters of Darth Maul and Darth Tyranus, or Grievous and Dooku.
Okay.
Just to have a more consistent, fleshed out bad guy that you can kind of track.
Yeah.
But initially I'm that's actually pretty cool, and that actually helps the flow of the movie. You have this you could do so much with that, even if early in episode 1 Qui-Gon and Dooku are dueling, right, and you have that whole thing. But now Maul has also become such a complex and interesting character. I would hate to lose one of them now. Now they're both too awesome.
You don't want to lose any of those characters. And we've done episodes, I think, on all of those characters.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm kind of conflicted because on the one hand, at the time, I'm that's actually really smart and good. And Star Wars has this bad habit of writing off villains that they just toss, right? Boba Fett, and kind of play up a little bit and then just sweep aside when they're no longer usable for the plot.
That's right. Yeah.
Also on disposable characters. So Dooku was actually initially conceived of as a woman before they kind of shifted gears and gave it to Christopher Lee, which we'll get into in a second here too. But the concept art that they built around Count Dooku, I believe, also is what led to the creation of Asajj Ventress, who ended up becoming Dooku's like Sith acolyte, and I believe some other prominent characters too. I think even Grievous's earliest, what's the word? Like conceptualizations for Grievous, I think, came out of like experimentation with Dooku potentially being a cyborg. And then playing into that whole Anakin, you know, looking into the future, kind of mirroring or whatever.
There's like a lot of that. Like Sifo Dyas was Sidious, right?
Yeah.
Like and they split off that character. Yeah, there's a lot of that in Star Wars where
things just start out maybe one way and then like over time they kind of go in a different direction.
I'm sure in a lot of fictional properties there's a lot of that where a character starts out one way and then it ends up being two characters. Or three characters becomes one character.
Yeah, exactly.
Stuff like that.
But it is cool to see like people that he would have been also be reincorporated in the future. Like someone took that concept and like, that's actually really cool. Let's go with that.
That's right.
And then wrote up a whole new character like Asajj Ventress.
Yeah.
So that's cool. Some linguistic trivia. So Azal the Sith Lord's names actually mean something. In Dooku's case, obviously Darth Tyranus comes from like tyrannical. But his regular name, Dooku, which oddly enough, he doesn't have like a first name. He's just Dooku of Sorenno.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, probably it's kind of the reverse of real life where royalty don't typically have last names.
Yeah.
But they have first names. But in this case, you have a royal house who I guess have last names. I don't know if this is typical for the whole, you know, culture of Sorenno, or maybe Dooku's. We just don't know what his name is. No one ever wrote it down.
Yeah.
But his name Dooku is actually means poison in Japanese, but also means something a little more explicit in Portuguese. So I don't know if they actually edited or changed. Oh yeah, they changed it for the Brazilian release. So his name is actually Ducan in Brazil.
Okay.
And presumably in Portugal.
Yeah.
Because of, again, that language translation. And the same thing actually happens with Captain Panaka, who's the captain of the Naboo Guard in episode 1. Panaka is, I don't remember what it means, but it's something not nice in Portuguese. So then I don't know if they changed his name either for that release, but it's kind of what you get when you're kind of mixing languages or like having global releases. You can't account for every meaning in every language.
Yeah.
Circling back to the portrayal of Count Dooku, Christopher Lee, fantastic choice.
Mm-hmm.
He died relatively recently, I think in 2016, I want to say.
Yeah.
Sometime about there. But he's been a staple in Hollywood for a long time, very prevalent in like the horror genre. His, I think, biggest breakout roles were as Count Dracula in like the early, I think even black and white kind of movies.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's played like really prominent villains and other things. He's actually quite tall. I think he's 6 foot something.
He is a tall guy.
Yeah. And he also has like a very deep, like imposing voice, which is probably what led him to be like typecast as a villain. But he plays like
Saruman.
Yeah, most prominently Saruman in Lord of the Rings, which was releasing too at the same time as Star Wars. Which
That's
is really
right.
cool to see him in both. And then also like Scramanga in the James Bond franchise.
Oh yeah.
Yes, and he's done a lot more. Like I think he's also well known for stage and for tons of movies. Like he's been in a lot. He's a little bit from an older generation of filmmaking, which like I personally haven't seen his whole filmography, but those are the 3 things I would probably identify him the most with. Yeah. That being said, also he's knighted. Okay, so not Count Dooku, Sir Christopher Lee. I swear, like you've seen those Dos Equis commercials of like the most interesting man in the world.
Oh, yeah.
I encourage all our listeners, if you don't know anything about Christopher Lee, go look up his Wikipedia page because that man has led like an exceedingly interesting life. He's like descended from like Byzantine royalty. He is related to some kind of like high or well-known like nobility across Europe and stuff. A lot of Europeans are because of intermarriage over hundreds of years, but I digress. Obviously, he's known for his being a famous actor and all that stuff, but also maybe not as well known. He used to serve in the British intelligence during World War II. So he's done like a lot of crazy, for the World War II era, like espionage and like black ops type stuff. And I even remember an interview I love Lord of the Rings as much as, more than Star Wars even. And so I've watched like all the extended content for the Lord of the Rings movies and the interviews and stuff. And Christopher Lee even references like he's probably like stabbed people in the back, like stealth killed people. Like he told Peter Jackson, he's like, I know what people sound like when they get stabbed in the back. So anyways, he's led a very interesting life, knighted. He was part of some heavy metal album too. He narrated like a heavy metal album. He's done like tons of crazy stuff. And his step cousin is Ian Fleming.
Oh, is that right?
Is the author of James Bond.
Bond author. Yeah.
And I don't know if this is true, if someone could verify this, but allegedly James Bond is based off of Christopher Lee and his time working in British intelligence.
Like MI6 or whatever.
Yeah.
MI5.
He didn't work for MI6 or 5, as far as I know. I think he worked for like the British Air Force intelligence.
Okay, yeah.
But
military guy.
Yeah. And like he's got a family. I believe his father also was in the military too.
Okay.
So allegedly Ian Fleming and he met up, and like I guess Christopher Lee very well may be real life James Bond.
He also apparently has like a big occult library of like weird occult books, like
a collection.
Yeah, just like kind of an eccentric, and has a lot of life experience.
Yeah,
so
definitely worth. Like I said, if you have a few minutes, just go look up his Wikipedia page and like read it top to bottom, because like there's no part of it that's not interesting. Like what the heck, like this guy's done and seen everything, which it's like I said, the most interesting man in the world is literally the guy. So.
Indeed. Well, before we take off here, let's just do a little bit of housekeeping. So I just wanted to give a big shout out to all of our new patrons. One of them is Luke, Cat God 101, and Rachel. So I just want to thank all our new patrons. And I just wanted to let everyone know, if you wanted to support the show, you can go on to patreon.com/starlore, and support the show for as little as $2 a month, $2 US a month, which are quickly deflating. So it's an even better deal than it was like a year ago. Also don't forget to follow us on all our social medias. We're on Discord. People often have a difficult time getting on Discord. In our more recent episodes, the Discord links should be the correct links. We will send it to you if you request it.
Yeah, we've gotten a few requests.
But I think people are looking at maybe some of our old episodes. I'm not sure exactly.
Through those links.
Yeah, and they're bad links. So just for the Discord link, our more recent episodes will have them. Or you can always message us, but we'll probably do a social post about it again, just so people have the right one. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.
Yeah, and just one more thing I guess we probably should have said at the beginning of the episode. We just want to welcome Paul on as a writer for us, and he's the one that actually wrote the script in this episode. So just a shout out to him, and you'll see hopefully a few more episodes written by him in the near future.
Indeed. Yeah, Paul has a bit of experience writing in film and writing screenplays and stuff, so we're happy to have him on, and it should be fun. And hopefully he'll be on the mic sometime soon.
Yeah.
All right. Peace.
It is an honor to stand here before you, for you represent the freedom and the future of our galaxy. The once great Republic and Jedi Order have become victims of their own ambitions, and the Supreme Chancellor is no more than a pawn of corporate monopolies. As a people, you called out for change. You called out for leadership, and I humbly answered that call. Together we challenged the system. We asked for equality, and how were we met? With war! The Jedi's secret army of clones was revealed, and their treachery was far greater than we could have imagined. Countless living beings, these clones the Jedi created, have been sent to their deaths, while we sacrifice mainly droids.
He makes a good point.
Our soldiers of flesh and blood are willing participants. They are your fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, who fight not because they were grown and designed to do so, but because they know in their hearts that they are fighting for a just and noble cause. It is not a simple thing to be your leader during this unfortunate war. But I shall receive this humanitarian honor and take it as a sign that my leadership has been met with your approval. Let the celebration begin!